My name is Nathan Cole, and I am the man who told the galaxy to sit down and be quiet. I am not proud of it, but I would do it again without hesitation, and that fact keeps me awake most nights. I remember the exact second everything changed. Not the day, not the hour, the second. I was mid-sentence, standing at the speaker's platform in the Grand Assembly Hall on Tyralis, the station world that floats between three dead stars in the Carius expanse. I had been delivering a routine trade proposal about mineral extraction rights in the Polara Belt. I had given versions of this speech dozens of times. I knew the rhythm of it, the pauses, the places where I would make eye contact with specific delegates to signal respect. 11 years of diplomacy had taught me that half of any negotiation happens in the silences between words. The Grand Assembly Hall was enormous, a circular chamber carved from the crystal bedrock of Tyralis itself, with tiered seating that rose in concentric rings around the central platform. 42 species had representatives in that room, 42 civilizations that called themselves the Galactic Concord, a brotherhood of intelligent life, bound together by treaties of trade and mutual protection. Translation fields hummed softly overhead, converting every language into every other language simultaneously, so that my English became Vorathi clicking, and Krell rumbling and Pelori singing, all at once, all in real time. I was talking about tariff adjustments on rare minerals when the comm unit embedded in my wrist began to buzz. Not the gentle pulse of a routine diplomatic message, the kind I received 100 times a day. This was different. Sharp, repeating, insistent. The pattern of a priority zero alert. The highest classification in the human diplomatic system. In 11 years of service, through border disputes and trade conflicts and 3 separate first contact situations, I had never once felt that pattern against my skin. I stopped talking. The chamber fell silent. 2,000 delegates from 42 species stared at me. The Vorathi ambassador, a tall insectoid figure with compound eyes that reflected light like shattered black diamonds, tilted her angular head. The Krell representative, a squat creature built like a living boulder, with 4 muscular arms, and skin the color and texture of granite, leaned forward in his reinforced chair. The Pelori delegate, a bird-like being with iridescent feathers that shifted color with her emotions, folded her wings tight against her body, sensing something wrong. I held up one finger, a human gesture they had all learned to interpret over a decade of watching me work. I looked at my wrist. The message was from Central Command on Earth. 7 words. 7 words that ended one era of human history and began another. Sol system under full-scale invasion. Drethani. My throat closed. Not tightened. Not constricted. Closed, as if someone had pressed a seal over my windpipe. I could not breathe for 3 full seconds. The Drethani supremacy was a militarist empire that had always operated outside the Concord. They controlled 11 star systems on the galactic rim, governed by a military council that viewed expansion as a biological imperative. They had been aggressive for centuries, probing borders, testing defenses, rattling sabers, but they had never done anything like this. The data packet attached to the message loaded onto my wrist display. 312 capital ships had entered Sol space simultaneously, arriving through 6 different approach vectors in a coordinated assault that must have taken months to plan. This was not a raid or a border incursion or a show of force. This was a genocide fleet, the kind of armada you assemble when your intention is not to conquer a civilization, but to erase one. I looked up at the assembly. I could feel my heartbeat in my fingertips, in my temples, behind my eyes. Delegates, I said. My voice did not shake, and I will carry the mystery of how I managed that to my grave. I have just received word that the Drethani supremacy has launched a full military assault on the Sol system. Earth, Mars, and the Jovian colonies are under direct orbital bombardment as I speak. Preliminary reports indicate massive civilian casualties. I am formally invoking Article 7 of the Concord Charter, the Mutual Defense Clause. Silence. Not the thoughtful, respectful silence that follows a reasonable request between colleagues. The heavy, suffocating silence that fills a room when every person in it has already decided to say no, but lacks the courage to say it out loud. I had been in enough negotiations to recognize the difference. The first kind of silence vibrates with possibility. The second kind sits like a stone on your chest. The Vorathi ambassador was the first to speak. Her translation field converted her rapid clicking into smooth, measured English. Ambassador Cole, the Concord recognizes the gravity of your situation. However, any military response of the scope you are requesting requires a full deliberation period. There are procedures that must be followed, consultations that must take place. Surely you understand. Procedures, I repeated. I let the word hang in the air. Ambassador, the Drithani are bombing civilian population centers. Right now, as we stand in this chamber discussing procedures, children are dying, hospitals are being destroyed, entire districts are burning. I am not asking you for a committee meeting. I am asking you to honor the pact that every species in this room signed. The Krell representative spoke next. His voice was deep, resonant, like the sound of stones grinding together in a slow avalanche. The Krell Dominion sympathizes with humanity's plight. However, we believe diplomatic channels should be explored before any military commitment is made. Perhaps the Drithani can be reasoned with. Perhaps there is a resolution that does not require the Concord to expend significant military resources on what may be a localized conflict. Localized, I said. 300 warships and you call it localized? No one responded to that. I looked around the chamber, making eye contact with every delegate I could reach. The Pelori was studying her notes as if they contained the secrets of the universe. The Janeth ambassador, a thin, elongated being with silvery skin and too many joints, had turned his chair slightly away from me, as if that small rotation could excuse him from the conversation. The Mahari delegate was whispering to her aide. The Tessakine, the Dolvari, the Rumelan, every single one of them had found somewhere else to look, something else to focus on, anything that was not the human standing at the platform asking for help. I understood then, with perfect, bitter clarity. This was not about procedures or deliberation or diplomatic channels. The Concord was not refusing to help because they needed time to think. They were refusing because they had done the calculation. The Drithani were powerful, aggressive, and dangerous. Helping humanity meant fighting the Drithani. Fighting the Drithani meant casualties, expenditure, risk. And humanity, for all its kindness, for all its schools built on alien worlds, for all its medical missions and cultural exchanges, and decades of good faith partnership, was simply not worth that cost. We were the soft ones, the species that never fought, never pushed back, never raised its voice, the species that responded to every insult with a smile, and every provocation with an olive branch. And now, when we needed the galaxy to be what it had promised to be, our friends looked at us the way you look at a stranger drowning in deep water, when you have decided that jumping in is too risky, sympathetic, regretful, immobile. I closed my datapad. I straightened my jacket. I looked at the Vorathi ambassador with a smile that I knew was the saddest expression I had ever worn. Thank you for your candor, Ambassador. I want every delegate in this chamber to remember this moment. Remember what you chose. Humanity will certainly remember. I turned and walked out of the Grand Assembly Hall. My footsteps echoed against the crystalline floor of the corridor outside. The walls of Teralis were semi-transparent, a feature the station's architects considered beautiful. And through them I could see the stars. Somewhere in that vast darkness, in a direction I could not pinpoint from here, my home was burning. Lucy Grant was waiting in the corridor. She was 28 years old, sharp as a blade, and in the 11 months she had worked as my senior aide, I had never seen her composure crack. It had cracked now. Her personal calm was clutched in both hands, and tears ran silently down her cheeks as she scrolled through the feeds. I could see the images reflected in her eyes, cities under bombardment, orbital platforms disintegrating into expanding clouds of debris, emergency channels saturated with distress calls that no one was answering. They said no, she said. It was not a question. They said later, which is their way of saying no while keeping the option to pretend they never refused. Lucy wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, a quick, angry gesture. So what do we do? I stopped walking. I leaned against the corridor wall and pressed my palms flat against the cool crystal. Through the transparency, I watched a Vorathi trade ship glide past the station, its running lights blinking green and gold, going about its business as if nothing had changed. Because for the Vorathi, nothing had. The galaxy was still the same place it had been an hour ago. Only our corner of it was on fire. I lifted my wristcom and entered a code I had memorized 12 years ago. A 16-character alphanumeric string given to me by a man whose name I never learned, in a room with no windows, on the day I accepted the position of senior ambassador. I had been told that the code was a precaution, a fail-safe, something I would never need to use. I had believed that. I had prayed every night for 12 years that it was true. The channel opened, encrypted, routed through 17 separate relay points, scattered across 3 different star systems, rendered completely untraceable by technology that the Concord did not know existed. This is Ambassador Nathan Cole. Authentication code, Whisper 77 Black. The Concord has refused to intervene. I am formally requesting activation of the Eschaton protocols. The voice on the other end belonged to a man I had never met and would never meet. His tone was calm, professional, the voice of someone who had trained for this exact conversation and had hoped, like me, that the training would be wasted. Authentication confirmed. Eschaton sequence initiated. All elements are moving to ready status. A pause. Then he added quietly, "God help us all, Ambassador." I closed the channel. Lucy was staring at me, her tears forgotten, replaced by something much more alert. She had heard of the Eschaton protocols. Every senior diplomat had, in the way that everyone has heard of earthquakes. You know they exist. You know they are dangerous. You believe, with the comfortable certainty of someone who has never experienced one, that they will always happen to someone else. "Nathan," she said slowly, "what did you just do?" I pushed away from the wall and started walking. Toward the docking bay, toward the fastest ship we had, toward home. Something that should have been done 300 years ago. Pack your things, Lucy. We are going home, and we do not have much time. Behind us, the Grand Assembly Hall continued to hum with diplomatic conversation. 42 species discussed trade routes and resource allocation, and expressed measured concern about the unfortunate situation in the Sol system. Voices rose and fell in practiced cadences. Notes were taken. Proposals were drafted. The machinery of galactic governance ground forward, steady and indifferent, like a clock that does not care what hour it strikes. None of them noticed us leave. None of them understood what was coming. The courier ship was called the Whitfield. It was small, barely 50 meters from bow to stern, with a crew of 4 and passenger space for 6. On paper, it was listed as a standard diplomatic transport vessel, the kind of ship that every Concord member operated for moving ambassadors between systems. In reality, it was one of the fastest ships humanity had ever built, equipped with a drive system that bore no resemblance to the fusion engines the galaxy thought we used. It could cross the distance between Teralis and Sol in just under 3 days. 3 days, 72 hours. I sat in the cramped passenger cabin, strapped into a seat that was designed for function rather than comfort, and calculated how many people would die in 72 hours. The math was simple and devastating. Based on the rate of casualties reported in the first transmission, the answer was somewhere north of 8 million. I did the calculation once, confirmed it, and then stopped thinking about numbers, because the numbers were turning me into something I did not want to be, while I was trapped in a metal tube hurtling through the void, with nothing to do but think. Lucy sat across from me, monitoring the communications feeds on a portable display. Every few minutes, she would glance up at me, and I could see the question building behind her eyes. She wanted answers. She wanted to understand what the Eschaton protocols meant, what I had set in motion, what was waiting for us when we reached Sol. I owed her that explanation. She had left everything behind on Teralis without hesitation, without complaint, because I had asked her to. The least I could give her was the truth. But the truth was enormous, and I was not sure I could carry it and hand it to someone else at the same time. I started with a story, It seemed easier than starting with the facts. When humanity first reached the stars, I said, 3 centuries ago, we were hopeful. More than hopeful, we were overjoyed. For the first time in our existence, we were not alone. We found the Tessakine, and they were gentle and curious. We found the Pelori, and they sang to us, and we wept at the beauty of it. We found the Krell, and despite their intimidating appearance, they turned out to be scholars and philosophers. We thought the universe was kinder than we had feared. Lucy was watching me, her display forgotten in her lap. We joined the Concord. We traded. We cooperated. We gave everything we had. We built schools on Vorathi colony worlds because their educational system could not keep pace with their population growth. We sent medical teams to the Krell frontier because a plague was devastating their outer settlements, and they did not have the research infrastructure to develop a cure fast enough. We shared our art, our music, our literature, and in return, we received theirs. And for a while, it felt like we had finally become what we had always dreamed of being, a species defined by connection rather than conquest. I paused. The ship hummed around us, the subtle vibration of engines that were pushing us through folded space at velocities that would have made every physicist in the Concord weep with disbelief. But we are human, I said. And the thing about humans is that we remember. Not just the good things. We remember every broken treaty in our own history, every genocide, every civilization that extended a hand in friendship and had that hand cut off at the wrist. We remember Rwanda and Armenia and the Trail of Tears, and 1,000 other moments when one group of humans decided that another group was not worth keeping alive. We remember the cost of being trusting in a universe that does not always reward trust. Lucy set down her display. What are you telling me, Nathan? I am telling you that while our diplomats were shaking hands and building schools, another branch of our government was building something else. Quietly, secretly, with a budget that does not appear in any public record, and personnel who are listed in no official database. They did not do this because they wanted to. They did it because they knew, with the certainty of a species that has spent 200,000 years learning the hard way, that someday the kindness would not be enough. Someday, someone would come for us. And on that day, we would need to be ready. I told her about Eleanor Webb first. Webb was a physicist, born on a research station orbiting Jupiter, a quiet woman, with an unremarkable public career and a classified research portfolio that would have rewritten every physics textbook in the galaxy. 60 years after first contact, working alone in a laboratory that officially did not exist, Webb cracked zero-point energy extraction. She found a way to tap into the quantum vacuum, the energy that exists in the fabric of empty space itself. Limitless power, drawn from the structure of reality. Every species in the Concord considered it theoretically impossible. Webb did it with a device that fit on a tabletop. The government of Earth faced a choice that day. They could announce the discovery to the galaxy and become, overnight, the most important civilization in known space. Zero-point energy would revolutionize everything. Travel, manufacturing, agriculture, medicine. Every species would want it. Humanity would be celebrated, elevated, possibly even worshipped. Or they could keep it secret. Hide it. Use it to build something that would ensure humanity's survival regardless of what the galaxy decided to do with us. They chose silence. I have spent years trying to decide if they were right, and I have never reached a conclusion that lets me sleep through the night. With zero-point energy, everything became possible. Our public fleet continued to run on fusion drives, the same technology every Concord species used, because maintaining the illusion of parity was essential. If the galaxy thought we were equals, they would treat us as equals. If they knew the truth, they would either try to take the technology from us or try to destroy us before we could use it. History, both human and galactic, offered no third option. Behind the public fleet, hidden in construction facilities buried in the deep void between star systems, in places where no sensor array pointed and no patrol ship ventured, we built something else. The Black Armada, 2,000 warships, each one powered by zero-point reactors, each one equipped with weapons that operated on principles of physics no other species had even theorized. Their hulls were coated in materials that absorbed every wavelength of electromagnetic radiation, rendering them invisible to any detection system in the galaxy. They could accelerate to velocities that would make a Concorde naval officer choke on his own disbelief. The crews were volunteers, career military personnel who understood that they would spend their entire adult lives in the void, training, maintaining readiness, and praying that they would never be called to fight. Their families believed they worked in classified deep space research. Their neighbors thought they were scientists studying dark matter or mapping gravitational anomalies. The truth was known to fewer than 200 people in all of human civilization, and every one of them carried the knowledge like a stone lodged in their chest. But the Armada was only the fist. The real architecture of deterrence was something far more ambitious and far more disturbing. I told Lucy about the Veil. For 2 centuries, humanity had been sending scientific survey ships into every corner of the galaxy. This was normal behavior. Every Concorde species conducted surveys. Our ships mapped stars, cataloged planetary systems, collected geological and atmospheric data, and published their findings in the shared Concorde research databases. The data was genuine. The science was real. But every single survey mission, without exception, left something behind. Small satellites, no larger than a human fist, powered by microscale zero-point reactors that would function for 10,000 years without maintenance. We placed them in orbit around every major star system in the galaxy. Vorathi homeworlds, Krell colonies, Pelori nesting grounds, Drethani military bases, uncontacted species on the galactic rim whose names we did not even know yet. Every star that mattered, and many that did not, received its complement of Veil satellites, delivered silently, activated remotely, and rendered undetectable by the same absorption coating we used on the Armada's hulls. The satellites were not weapons in the way the galaxy understood weapons. They did not fire projectiles or energy beams. Each one carried a device, based on Eleanor Webb's zero-point research, that could interfere with a star's fusion cycle, not cause a supernova. Nothing so dramatic or so quick. Instead, the device would introduce a cascading instability in the star's core, a subtle disruption that would cause the fusion process to gradually decelerate. The star would not explode. It would simply wind down, like a fire running out of fuel, growing dimmer and cooler over the course of a decade, until it could no longer sustain life on any of its orbiting worlds. A slow death for every planet in the system, not immediate enough to evacuate, not dramatic enough to rally against. Just a quiet, relentless fading. And the entire network was wired to a dead man's switch. If humanity was ever destroyed, if our civilization was ever wiped out completely, the switch would trigger automatically. Every satellite, every star, the galaxy would go dark. Lucy did not speak for almost 10 minutes after I finished explaining the Veil. She sat in her seat and stared at the viewport and processed what I had told her, and I watched the color drain from her face as the full implications settled into place. Every star, she said finally. Every star that matters, and most that do not. And they do not know. None of them. None. She turned to look at me, and her expression was something I had never seen before. Not anger, not fear, not disgust. Something beyond all of those. The face of someone whose entire understanding of reality has been quietly replaced while they were not paying attention. Nathan, that is not a deterrent. That is a threat to end all complex life in the galaxy. Yes, I said. That is exactly what it is, and it has been in place for over a century. I told her about the third component, the messenger probes. Compared to the Veil and the Armada, they were almost quaint. Billions of tiny devices, each one no larger than a coin, scattered across every system, every world, every station and orbital platform in known space. They had been distributed over 2 centuries through the simplest method imaginable. We hid them in trade goods. We attached them to the hulls of ships we serviced in our repair yards. We let them drift in asteroid belts and planetary rings, camouflaged as natural debris. Each probe contained a single-use holographic projector and enough stored power to operate for 30 seconds. Their purpose was straightforward. When activated, Every probe in the galaxy would fire simultaneously, projecting the same holographic message on every inhabited world at the same moment. A synchronized communication from humanity to every living being in the galaxy. We had spent 3 centuries building the infrastructure for a single conversation, and we had hoped, desperately, that we would never need to have it. Lucy looked at me as if I were a stranger, and in a way, I was. The Nathan Cole she had known, the patient diplomat who believed in handshakes and compromise, and the fundamental decency of intelligent life, was still here. But now she could see what was underneath him. The foundation he had been standing on all along, built from paranoia and preparation and the grim mathematics of survival. The schools were real, I said, because I needed to say it, needed to hear it spoken aloud. The medical missions were real. Every friendship, every partnership, every act of goodwill, all of it was genuine. We were not pretending. We are not monsters wearing masks. But, Lucy said, but we are human, and humans have never been able to separate love from fear. We built the schools because we cared. We built the veil because we remembered what happens to species that only care. The comm panel chimed. Another update from Sol. Lucy read it, and I watched her jaw tighten. The Drethani had landed ground forces on 3 continents. Casualty estimates had passed 9 million and were accelerating. The names of destroyed cities scrolled across the screen like a funeral procession made of text. I checked the family notification channel. A message from my brother, sent 11 hours ago. My hands were steady as I opened it. My hands were steady. The rest of me was not. Nathan, Grace is gone. The Osaka bombardment. She was visiting Aunt Helen at the medical center. I cannot reach Helen either. Please come home. Please. Grace Holloway, my niece, 12 years old. She liked birds and strawberry ice cream, and building model ships at the kitchen table, while I told her stories about the alien species I had met. She had once drawn a picture of herself standing next to a Tessakine, both of them smiling, holding hands. She had written underneath it, in careful 12-year-old handwriting, "Friends across the stars." I kept that picture in my desk drawer at the embassy. It was probably ash now. I closed the message. I sat very still. Lucy watched me. She did not ask what the message said. She could read it on my face. When I spoke again, my voice sounded like it belonged to a different person. Older, harder, stripped of everything soft. Open a secure channel to Fleet Admiral Simon Drake. Lucy opened the channel without asking if I was sure. She had learned in that moment to stop questioning and start acting. Simon Drake appeared on the screen. A man in his early 60s with iron-gray hair, cut close to his skull, and eyes that looked like they had been watching the darkness for so long that they had absorbed some of it. He was aboard the flagship of the Black Armada, hidden in the void beneath the ecliptic plane of the Sol system, where no sensor could reach, and no fleet would think to look. He had been waiting for this call for 30 years. "Ambassador," he said. "Admiral, authorization is confirmed. The Concorde will not help us. Bring the Armada in." Drake studied my face through the screen. He was not looking for permission. He already had that. He was looking for something else. Doubt, perhaps. Or grief. He found the grief. I am certain of that. But he did not find any doubt. 2,000 ships, he said. Full readiness. We will be in engagement range in 4 hours. 4 hours. I did the math. More lives lost in 4 hours. More names that would end up carved in stone. Make it faster if you can. "We will do what we can, Ambassador." The screen went dark. The Whitfield drove on through the void, carrying us toward a home that was burning, toward a battle that would change the meaning of every star in the sky. The Drethani fleet was in a state of celebration when the Black Armada arrived. I learned this later, from intercepted communications that our intelligence teams decrypted in the days after the battle. The Drethani officers had been toasting their supreme commander, a warlord named Drethus Val, exchanging congratulations and already dividing Earth's continents into administrative zones. Val himself had broadcast a galaxy-wide victory declaration, in which he described humanity as a failed experiment, a species that had wasted its potential on softness and sentiment, unworthy of the stars it had presumed to walk among. The Concorde watched his broadcast with the detached interest of spectators at a sporting event. Across 42 homeworlds, intelligence analysts and military observers monitored their long-range sensor arrays and saw exactly what they expected to see: a powerful military empire completing the destruction of a peaceful, defenseless civilization. Several Concorde delegations had already begun drafting proposals for how to redistribute humanity's former trade routes and resource agreements. The Janeth ambassador had reportedly begun negotiations with the Drithani for access to the Sol system's helium-3 reserves before the bombardment was even complete. None of them noticed the shadows moving beneath the plane of the solar system. The Black Armada rose from the void like a tide of darkness. 2,000 ships, each one coated in radiation-absorbing materials that made them functionally invisible, ascending from below the ecliptic plane in perfect formation. They had been hiding there for 3 decades, drifting in the empty space where no planet orbited and no sensor pointed, running silent, waiting with the patience of something that has all the time in the universe and none of the urgency. Until now, the Drithani detected them 11 seconds before engagement. 11 seconds. Their sensor officers saw the readings and could not process them fast enough to form words. The shapes appearing on their screens did not match any known vessel configuration. The energy signatures were wrong, impossible, reading as something that should not exist according to every model of physics the Drithani possessed. One sensor officer on a Drithani cruiser managed to transmit a single word before the first compression wave hit his ship. The word was, below. I watched it begin from the command deck of Drake's flagship, a vessel called the Nightfall. The Whitfield had rendezvoused with the Armada 40 minutes before engagement, and Drake had brought me aboard personally, giving me a seat at the observation station where I could see every tactical display, every sensor feed, every angle of what was about to happen. He wanted a witness. Not a military witness, not an officer who would write a report filed in some classified database. A civilian, a diplomat, someone who could tell the story afterward with the perspective of a man who had spent his entire career believing in peace and was now watching its opposite. The command deck of the Nightfall was unlike any military space I had ever seen. There was no shouting, no chaos, no officers barking urgent orders at frantic subordinates. The room was quiet, almost serene, with soft ambient lighting and workstations arranged in concentric semicircles around a central holographic display that showed the entire battlespace in 3 dimensions. Officers spoke in low, measured voices, relaying data and confirmations with the calm efficiency of surgeons performing an operation they had rehearsed 1,000 times. Drake stood at the center, his hands clasped behind his back, watching the display with an expression of absolute concentration. He did not look excited or angry or vengeful. He looked like a man doing a job he had trained for his entire life and wished he had never been asked to do. "Begin," he said. One word. Quiet. Final. The Black Armada's weapons engaged, and the laws of physics as the galaxy understood them ceased to apply. There were no beams of light, no streaks of plasma arcing between ships, no railgun slugs punching through armor plating, no missiles trailing fire across the void. Instead, space itself began to change around the Drithani vessels. The fabric of reality in the immediate vicinity of each targeted ship started to ripple, a subtle visual distortion that looked, on the sensor displays, like heat shimmer rising from pavement on a summer day. Then the ripples tightened, contracted, folded inward. Spatial compression, the ability to manipulate the geometry of space around a specific point, increasing gravitational force to levels that no physical structure could withstand. A Drithani capital ship, 3 kilometers long, armored with composite plating, designed to absorb the most powerful weapons in the galaxy, would simply crumple. The space around it would fold, and the ship would fold with it, crushed by forces that turned 3 kilometers of warship into a dense metallic sphere no larger than a small building. No explosion, no fire, no shower of debris. One moment, a fully armed and operational warship. The next, a dark ball of compressed metal, tumbling slowly in the void. silent and still. The first wave took 47 Drathani capital ships in 90 seconds. I watched it happen on the display, and my mind could not fully process what my eyes were seeing. Ships that had been raining destruction on my homeworld, ships that had killed Grace and millions of others, were simply ceasing to exist as functional objects, not destroyed in the way the galaxy understood destruction, with fire and fury, and the dramatic spectacle of combat, removed, compressed into irrelevance with the casual efficiency of someone crumpling a piece of paper. The Drathani fleet erupted into chaos. Their communications channels became a wall of noise, overlapping transmissions in a dozen different command dialects, contradictory orders from officers who could not understand what was happening to their ships. Some captains tried to return fire, unleashing everything they had in the direction of the armada, heavy plasma cannons that could crack the crust of a moon, kinetic batteries that could accelerate tungsten slugs to a fraction of light speed, missile volleys carrying warheads measured in megatons. None of it mattered. The Black Armada moved with a speed and agility that made the Drathani's weapons look like stones thrown at lightning. Our ships changed direction instantaneously, appearing in positions that should have been impossible to reach, opening compression fields and folding Drathani vessels before their targeting systems could establish a lock. The Drathani were fighting an enemy that operated outside their understanding of what was physically possible, and the gap between their technology and ours was not a gap. It was an abyss. By the 6th hour, the Drathani had lost 140 ships. By the 12th hour, the number had passed 200. Their fleet had splintered into smaller groups, some trying to fight, some trying to run, some simply drifting with their engines cold and their weapons silent, hoping that stillness might save them where combat had not. Drake managed the battle with surgical precision. He did not waste resources. He did not pursue fleeing ships with more force than necessary. He directed the armada like a conductor directing an orchestra, each movement deliberate, each decision calculated to achieve maximum expenditure of energy, and throughout it all, he gave one standing order that was never revoked, never modified, never questioned. All escape pods are to be retrieved. All surrendering vessels are to be secured. All prisoners will receive immediate medical attention and will be treated with full dignity and respect, no exceptions. A young officer named Peter Hale questioned this order once, early in the battle, when the casualty reports from Earth were still coming in and emotions aboard the Nightfall were running close to the surface. Sir, with respect, these are the people who bombed our cities, our families, our children. Drake looked at him. The look lasted 3 seconds, and in those 3 seconds, Peter Hale aged 5 years. Lieutenant, we are not them. That is the entire point. The moment we treat prisoners the way they treated our civilians, we become exactly what they accused us of being. We are better than that. We will prove it. Now carry out the order. Hale carried out the order. Every officer on that ship carried it out. Not because they agreed with it in their hearts, but because they understood what Drake understood, what I understood, what the architects of the quiet architecture had understood 3 centuries ago. The weapons were one message, the mercy was another, and both messages needed to be received together. Because a species that can fold your warships like tinfoil and also treats your wounded with compassion is far more terrifying than one that simply destroys. One is a monster. The other is something you cannot categorize, cannot predict, cannot dismiss. And it is the things you cannot dismiss that keep you awake at night. The battle lasted 60 hours. 60 hours to dismantle an invasion force of 312 capital ships crewed by the most aggressive military species in the galaxy. The Drathani fought hard. They fought with everything they had, because the Drathani understood combat the way humans understood diplomacy, as an art form refined over generations. They regrouped 3 times, each time attempting a different tactical approach. A concentrated push at the Armada's center, a wide flanking maneuver, a desperate sprint for the Sol system boundary, hoping to reach open space and scatter. None of it worked. The Black Armada adjusted to every tactic within minutes, closing gaps, cutting off escape routes, folding ships with the same relentless, mechanical patience it had displayed since the first compression wave. By the 48th hour, only one Drathani vessel was still fighting, The Iron Verdict, Supreme Commander Drethus Val's flagship, a massive warship nearly 5 kilometers long, the largest military vessel the Drethani had ever constructed. It was surrounded on every side by armada ships. Its weapons were still firing, but its shots were wild, unfocused, the flailing of a wounded animal that refuses to accept what is happening to it. Drake opened a direct channel. His voice was calm, almost gentle. Supreme Commander Val, your fleet is gone. Your invasion has failed. You have 2 options. Power down your weapons and surrender, and your crew will live. Continue fighting, and they will not. I am giving you 60 seconds to decide. Silence on the channel. Then Val's voice, thick with something I had never heard from a Drethani. What are you? We studied your species for decades. You had no military capability. You had no weapons worth respecting. What are you? Drake glanced at me. I do not know what he saw in my face, but whatever it was, it made him nod slightly before turning back to the comm. We are human, he said. We are what happens when you push the quiet ones past the point of patience. Power down your weapons, Commander. I will not ask again. The Iron Verdict went dark. Weapons offline. Engines cold. The last Drethani ship in the Sol system had surrendered. Drake exhaled slowly. Around the command deck, officers sat in stunned silence, the reality of what they had just accomplished settling over them like a weight. 30 years of hiding, of training, of waiting in the dark, and it was over in 60 hours. An officer approached Drake. Admiral, final consolidated casualty report. 14,200,000 human casualties across all Sol system engagements, civilian and military combined. Armada losses are 0 confirmed, 3 ships with minor structural damage. 0 losses, 2,000 ships against 312, and we had not lost a single one. The technological gap was that vast. We had built an armada that was, for all practical purposes, invincible against anything the galaxy could currently field, and we had hidden it in the dark for 3 decades, hoping we would never need to prove it. Drake closed his eyes for 3 seconds. When he opened them, nothing about his expression had changed, but something behind it had shifted. Some internal architecture rearranging itself around the weight of 14 million dead, and the knowledge that the hiding was over. The galaxy knew now. There was no going back to what we had been. Ambassador Cole, he said, the military operation is complete. What happens next is in your hands. I stood up from my observation seat. My legs were stiff from sitting for hours without moving, and my back ached, and there was a hollow space behind my ribs where something important used to be. Confidence, maybe, or innocence, or the ability to believe that the universe could be navigated without threats. Prepare the messenger probes, I said. All of them. Every system, every world, every station. I have something to say to the galaxy. Drake gave the order. Across the Milky Way, in star systems separated by thousands of light-years, billions of dormant devices began to wake, in asteroid belts and planetary rings, on the undersides of trade stations and the hulls of cargo ships, inside communications relays and weather satellites, and navigational buoys. The messenger probes powered on for the first and only time in their existence, and waited for their signal. I walked to the recording chamber, a small, bare room in the interior of the Nightfall, originally designed as a backup communications center, now emptied of everything except a single camera, mounted on a tripod, and a small light that would tell me when the recording was live. I had changed into civilian clothes before entering, a simple gray shirt and dark trousers. No uniform, no medals, no flags behind me, no podium, no seal of office, no symbols of authority. I wanted them to see a man. Not a general, not a president, not a symbol of military power. A man, standing alone in an empty room, with nothing to hide behind. Lucy met me at the door. Her eyes were red but dry. She had done her crying. What was left was something harder and more useful. The network is synchronized, she said. Every probe in the galaxy is linked and waiting. When you begin, the signal will propagate through the relay system. Every inhabited world, every orbital station, every ship with a communications array will receive the broadcast simultaneously. There will be no delay, no warning. It will simply appear. How many beings will see it? She checked her datapad. Conservative estimate, based on population data from the Concord census. Roughly 300 billion. 300 billion. Every sapient creature in the galaxy, watching a man in a gray shirt tell them the truth about the species they had dismissed as soft. "Are you ready?" Lucy asked. "No," I said, "but readiness is not the requirement. Necessity is." I walked in. The door closed behind me. The camera activated. A small red indicator light blinked once, then held steady, and I knew that in control rooms across the nightfall, technicians were confirming the link to the messenger network, verifying signal integrity, preparing to transmit my face and my voice to every corner of the galaxy. I took a breath. I thought about Grace. I thought about the 14 million. I thought about the assembly hall on Teralis and the 42 species that had chosen to look away. Then I spoke. "My name is Nathan Cole. I am the senior ambassador of the human species to the Galactic Concord, and what I am about to tell you is the truth. I will say it once. I will not repeat it, and I will not apologize for any of it. 12 days ago, the Drethani Supremacy launched an unprovoked assault on the Sol system, the home of the human species. 312 capital warships entered our space without warning and began the systematic bombardment of our worlds. 14 million of our people are dead. Cities that stood for centuries have been reduced to rubble. Hospitals, schools, homes, parks where children played, all of them gone. Families that will never be complete again, lives that will never be lived. In accordance with the treaties we signed in good faith, we invoked the Mutual Defense Clause of the Concord Charter and asked our allies for help. We asked the Vorathi, we asked the Krell, we asked every single species that had shaken our hands and called us friends, and benefited from our generosity for 300 years. Not one of them answered. Not one of them sent a single ship. You watched us burn, and you decided that we were not worth the trouble of saving. I am here to tell you that we saved ourselves. The Drethani invasion fleet has been destroyed. Completely. Irrevocably. Every ship. Neutralized in 60 hours by a military force that none of you knew existed. I am not going to explain the technology. I am not going to share the specifications. What I am going to do is show you the sensor data from the engagement, so you can see for yourselves what happened and draw your own conclusions about what it means. But the fleet is not the message. The fleet is simply proof that the message is credible. The message is this. For 3 centuries, humanity has maintained a network of devices in orbit around every major star system in this galaxy. Your star systems, your homeworlds, your colonies. They were placed by our survey ships over the course of 200 years, and they are undetectable by any sensor technology currently available to any Concord species. Each device is capable of disrupting the fusion process of the star it orbits, not rapidly, not dramatically, but permanently. A star affected by these devices will gradually cease to function. Within a decade, it will no longer produce enough energy to sustain life on any of its planets. This network is called the Veil, and it is connected to a dead man's switch. If human civilization is destroyed, every device in the network activates automatically. Every star, every system, every world. The galaxy goes dark, and nothing survives. I want to be very clear about what I am telling you. This is not a bluff. This is not a negotiating position. The Veil has been operational for over 100 years. You are hearing about it now because 12 days ago, an alien empire tried to wipe us out, and you, our allies, our partners, our friends, chose to let it happen. That choice has consequences. Here are the consequences. We are not conquerors. We do not want your worlds. We do not want your resources. We do not want to rule you, control you, or change you in any way. We are going to go home. We are going to bury our 14 million dead. We are going to rebuild our cities and our lives and our future. And we are going to leave every single device in the Veil exactly where it is. This is not a declaration of war. It is a declaration of consequence. You are free to live as you choose. Govern yourselves as you see fit. Trade, explore, expand, believe whatever you wish to believe. We will not interfere. If the Concord will have us, we will return to our seat and continue to be the partners we have always been. But know this, if any species, any alliance, any empire, any single warship fires on a human world again, the Veil activates, not against the attacker alone, against everyone, every star, every system, everything ends, and nothing that comes after will remember that any of us were here. We have spent 300 years surviving in the void between stars. We have proven that we can live in the dark. We have done it for 3 decades already, building, preparing, and waiting. Can you say the same? Can any of you survive without your son? I did not want to stand here. I did not want to give this speech. I became a diplomat because I believed that intelligent species could choose cooperation over conflict, empathy over indifference, courage over convenience. I still believe that. But 14 million of my people are dead because we relied on belief instead of certainty, and I will not make that mistake again. This is humanity's final message to the galaxy. Understand it. Remember it. There will not be another. The red light blinked off. I stood in the empty room and listened to the silence. Not the silence of a pause, but the silence of an ending. Something had been closed. A door, a chapter, an era. Whatever humanity had been before this moment, we were something else now, and there was no path back to what we had been. My hands were trembling. I pressed them flat against my legs and waited for the shaking to stop. It did not stop. I do not think it ever fully stopped. Even now, a year later, some mornings I wake up and my hands are trembling, and I lie in bed and watch them shake and remember what they did. Lucy opened the door. She stood in the doorway and looked at me, and the expression on her face was one I will never forget. Not admiration, not fear. Grief, matching mine, reflected back at me by someone who understood what I had given up in that room. Not just secrets, not just leverage, something more personal. The version of myself that believed the galaxy could be made better through patience and goodwill. That version of Nathan Cole died in that recording chamber, and Lucy was the only one who attended the funeral. It is playing, she said. Everywhere. Every world. Every station. 300 billion beings are watching it right now. I nodded. Then it is done. I walked past her, through the corridor of the nightfall, past officers who stopped what they were doing, and watched me pass with expressions I could not read, to the observation deck at the bow of the ship. I pressed my forehead against the cold glass, and looked out at the stars. Somewhere among them, on 1,000 different worlds, billions of beings were watching a hologram of a tired man in a gray shirt, and their understanding of the universe was rewriting itself in real time. The Vorathi ambassador, I would learn later, watched the entire message alone in her quarters, and when it ended, she sat in silence for 2 hours before contacting her government. The Krell Military Council convened an emergency session that lasted 4 days. The Pelori simply sang, a low, mournful harmonic that their species produced in moments of collective distress, and the sound carried through every Pelori settlement on every world, a song of reckoning. I did not feel powerful. I did not feel victorious. I felt like a man who had just set fire to a bridge and was watching the flames from the far side, knowing that he could never go back. 1 year later, I retired. I found a cottage on the southern coast of what had been the French Riviera. The orbital bombardment had reshaped the Mediterranean coastline, pushing the water inland by half a kilometer in some stretches. My cottage sat on the new shore, on ground that had been a vineyard 12 months ago. The vines were gone, replaced by salt-tolerant grasses that the reconstruction teams had planted to stabilize the soil. Some mornings, walking along the water's edge, I would find fragments of old infrastructure in the sand, pieces of road, a section of irrigation pipe, once a ceramic tile that had been part of someone's kitchen floor, relics of a world that existed before the Drethani, decided we did not deserve to exist. I started writing. These words, this account. Not because anyone asked me to, not because I believed the galaxy needed another version of events, but because I needed to put the story somewhere outside my own head before it consumed me. The weight of carrying it alone was too much, and I had learned, in my year of silence, that grief unspoken does not diminish. It calcifies. It becomes part of your skeleton, and eventually you cannot tell the difference between the grief and yourself. The galaxy had changed, and the change was total. The Concorde still existed, technically, but the comfortable pretenses had been stripped away like paint from a wall, revealing the raw structure underneath. Mutual defense was no longer a clause to be debated and delayed. It was immediate, unconditional, and enforced with a speed that would have been comical if the reason for it were not so grim. When a minor border dispute arose between the Tessakine and the Dolvari 6 months after the message, both species resolved it in 48 hours. No shots fired, no posturing, no deliberation. Because both of them understood, with a clarity that had been permanently etched into their political consciousness, that if the system broke down, if another species was abandoned the way humanity had been, the consequences would not be diplomatic. The Drethani supremacy collapsed from within 4 months after the battle. Their own people did it. When the surviving officers of the invasion fleet were returned to Drethani space under humanitarian terms, treated well, fed, given medical care, they carried with them the footage of what the Black Armada had done to 300 warships. The Drethani public, raised on decades of propaganda about their military supremacy, watched their fleet fold in on itself like wet paper, and understood that their leaders had dragged them to the edge of extinction for the sake of pride. The uprising was swift. The War Council was removed from power. A provisional civilian government petitioned for observer status in the Concorde, and it was granted unanimously. Because nobody wanted to be the species that said no to the Drethani while humanity was watching. I followed these developments from my cottage, reading intelligence summaries that Lucy forwarded out of habit. She had been promoted 3 times since our return to Earth, and now held a position that would have taken most diplomats 20 years to reach. She called me every week. The calls followed the same pattern every time. She would tell me the news. I would listen. She would ask how I was. I would tell her I was fine. She would not believe me, and I would not expect her to, and we would both accept the polite fiction and move on. The truth was that I was not fine, and I was not sure I would ever be fine again, and the word fine had lost most of its meaning for me anyway. I was functional. I ate meals. I slept, though rarely well. I walked the new shoreline every morning. I sat on my porch and watched the waves. I wrote. And every week, without fail, I drove to the memorial fields outside New Geneva. They had built the memorial on a high plateau overlooking the lake, a vast expanse of black stone laid flat against the earth, stretching in every direction as far as the eye could follow. 14,200,000 names carved into the stone in letters small enough that you had to kneel to read them. The memorial had no walls, no borders, no defined edge. It simply spread outward, name after name after name, until the names became the landscape, until you could not tell where the memorial ended and the world began. Walking its full length took 2 days. I know this because I walked it 3 times, end to end, reading names until my eyes blurred and my knees ached, and the faces of strangers swam in my vision like ghosts. Grace Holloway. Row 7, Section 14, Stone 2247. My niece, 12 years old. The stone recorded her name, her dates of birth and death, and the single word Osaka, the city where she died. It did not mention that she liked birds. It did not mention the picture she drew of herself holding hands with a Tessakine. It did not mention strawberry ice cream or model ships, or the way her laughter sounded in the kitchen on Sunday mornings. Stones do not have room for the things that matter most. I visited her every week. I brought flowers when the gardens had recovered enough to produce them. When they had not, I brought myself, and I stood there, and I talked to her the way I used to when she was alive, telling her about my week, about the weather, about the book I was reading or the bird I had seen from my porch. I told her about the long quiet, as people had started calling it, The unprecedented era of galactic peace that had descended like a blanket over every civilization in known space. No wars, no invasions, no border skirmishes, no arms races, just silence, vast and unbroken, from one end of the galaxy to the other. I did not tell her why the silence held. I could not bring myself to explain to a 12-year-old girl, even a 12-year-old girl who was no longer there to hear me, that the peace she would have loved was built on the threat of total annihilation. She had believed in the good version of humanity, the version that builds and heals and reaches out across the void with open hands. I could not tell her that the version of humanity that actually saved us was the one that put a loaded weapon against the temple of every star in the sky. Simon Drake visited me 8 months after I retired. He came unannounced, arriving in a civilian ground car, wearing ordinary clothes that looked strange on a man whose body had been shaped by 30 years of military service. We sat on my porch and drank coffee and watched the waves reshape the new shoreline. The Armada is being drawn down, he told me. 1,200 ships instead of 2,000. There is political pressure to go further. Is that wise? Drake shrugged, a gesture that looked wrong on him, too casual for a man who had spent his life maintaining perfect posture. The veil is the real deterrent. Always was. The Armada was the backup plan. As long as every star in the galaxy has a satellite in orbit, nobody is going to start anything. Nobody, I said. That is a large claim. It is a mathematical certainty. I have seen the game theory models. The veil makes aggression irrational for any actor, regardless of their motivation, ideology, or strategic position. There is no scenario in which attacking humanity produces a favorable outcome. The math is absolute. Math is absolute, I agreed. People are not. Drake set down his coffee. Nathan, what we built is a galaxy where children do not get bombed. If maintaining that requires every species in the Concord to be afraid of us, I will carry that weight gladly. I looked at him, studied the lines around his eyes, the set of his jaw, the way his hands rested on the arms of his chair, with the deliberate stillness of someone who has trained himself not to fidget. Do you sleep well, Simon? He met my gaze. He did not answer. The silence between us stretched out and filled with all the things that neither of us could say, because saying them would mean admitting that victory and grief are not opposites, that they can occupy the same space in the same heart, and that the space they share is too small for either to exist comfortably. He left an hour later. I watched his car disappear down the coast road, and then I went inside and sat at my desk and stared at the wall for a long time before picking up my pen. The memoir had grown far beyond what I originally planned. It started as a record, a timeline, a sequence of events laid out in order so that future historians would have a primary source. But it kept drifting into territory I had not intended to explore. My childhood. The first time I saw the stars from a ship window and felt the vertigo of realizing how small we were. The day I decided to become a diplomat, sitting in a university lecture hall, listening to a professor describe the Concord as the greatest achievement in the history of intelligent life. My first posting, a junior attaché on the Tessakeen homeworld, overwhelmed by the beauty of their architecture and the gentleness of their customs. All of it undercut, now, by the knowledge that the entire time I was building friendships and negotiating trade agreements and believing in the fundamental goodness of the galactic community, the Veil satellites were already in place, orbiting every sun in the sky, waiting patiently for a signal that would end everything. Were we always this? I asked myself. Was the kindness real, or was it camouflage? Were the schools and the medical missions and the cultural exchanges genuine, or were they cover for the survey ships that planted the Veil? Could both things be true at the same time? Could we be genuinely kind and genuinely prepared for the worst, without one negating the other? I wanted to believe that both were real, that building the Veil did not undo the schools, that the mercy we showed the Drithani prisoners was not undermined by the threat we made to every star in the galaxy. I wanted to believe that love and caution could coexist, that preparing for the worst did not mean expecting it, that we could hold a hand out in friendship while keeping the other hand behind our back without being liars. I wanted to believe it. Most days I almost could. It was on one of the days when I could not that the visitor arrived. The shuttle landed on the small pad behind my cottage in the late morning. I heard the engines, a distinctive high-pitched whine that I recognized as Vorathi design, and went to the window. The craft was sleek and angular, with the tri-wing configuration used by the Vorathi diplomatic service. It settled onto the pad with the precision of a species that took engineering personally. I opened my front door and waited. The Vorathi who descended the ramp was young. Her exoskeleton was a vivid emerald green, not yet darkened to the near black that came with age among her species. Her compound eyes were wide and mobile, taking in the cottage, the coastline, the sky, everything at once, with the panoramic vision that Vorathi used to compensate for their inability to turn their heads. She wore a translator collar that converted her rapid mandible clicks into accented English with a half-second delay. Ambassador Cole? Former ambassador. I have been retired for some time. My name is Seelith Vaughn. I am a junior attaché with the Vorathi mission to Earth. I carry a formal message from the Vorathi Assembly, but I also have a personal question, if you would permit me to ask it. I studied her for a moment. She was nervous. Her upper limbs were clasped tightly against her thorax, a Vorathi posture that indicated anxiety. Whatever she had come to ask, it was not the formal message. The formal message was the excuse. The question was the reason. "Come inside," I said. "I will make tea." We sat at my kitchen table. The cottage was small and simple, rebuilt from salvaged materials by construction crews who prioritized function over aesthetics. The kitchen had a view of the water through a window that did not close properly, letting in a constant draft of salt air. I made tea, an English breakfast blend that I had been drinking every morning for 30 years, and set a cup in front of Seelith. She could not drink it. Her species did not process liquids the way humans did, but she wrapped her upper limbs around the cup and held it close to her body, absorbing the warmth. "Your formal message first," I said. She recited it carefully, in the precise, rehearsed cadence of someone delivering words written by a committee and approved through 6 layers of bureaucratic review. The Vorathi Assembly wished to express its profound regret regarding the events surrounding the Drethani invasion. They acknowledged that their failure to honor the Mutual Defense Pact had contributed to unnecessary suffering, and they were committed to ensuring that such a failure would never be repeated. They valued their partnership with humanity. They looked forward to many centuries of continued cooperation. It was an apology that was not quite an apology. Regret without admission. Acknowledgement without blame. The kind of diplomatic language that takes responsibility for a feeling without taking responsibility for a choice. I had written similar statements myself, in my previous life, and I recognized the careful architecture of it, every word chosen to convey sincerity, while conceding nothing that could be used as leverage. "Thank you," I said. "Please convey my appreciation to the Assembly." She nodded. Then she set down the teacup, her compound eyes fixed on me with an intensity that silenced everything else in the room. The nervous energy was gone. She was completely still, completely focused, and the question she asked was the one that I had been waiting a year for someone to ask. "Ambassador Cole, would you really have done it? If the Drethani had succeeded, if humanity had been destroyed, would the veil have activated? Would you have killed every star in the galaxy?" There it was, the question beneath all the other questions, the one that every intelligence agency, every military analyst, every philosopher and theologian, and frightened citizen on every world in the Concord had been debating for 12 months. The question that the long quiet was built on, because the answer to it determined whether the peace was real or whether it was a bluff. And if it was a bluff, then someone, someday, would call it. I looked at Seelith Vaughn. I looked at this young Vorathi diplomat sitting in my kitchen, in a cottage built on reshaped ground, surrounded by the sounds of waves and wind, and the distant calls of seabirds that were slowly returning to a coast that had been scoured by orbital fire. I looked at her, and I thought about the question with the full weight of a year of solitary contemplation. The honest answer was complicated. The veil was automated. Its dead man's switch was designed to function without human input, triggering if certain conditions were met. specifically the confirmed destruction of human civilization. In that sense, the question was moot. If we were gone, the veil would activate regardless of anyone's intention. That was the whole point. A deterrent that relies on a conscious decision to use it is not a deterrent at all, because the enemy can always gamble that you will flinch. The veil removed the flinch from the equation. But Seelith's question was not really about the mechanism. She was not asking me about automated switches and trigger conditions. She was asking about intent, about the moral architecture behind the engineering. Did we build the veil hoping it would never fire, a regretful precaution taken by a species that wished it lived in a kinder universe? Or did we build it with the cold acceptance that if it came down to it, we would let everything end rather than go quietly? I thought about grace. I thought about 14 million names carved in black stone that stretched to the horizon. I thought about the Grand Assembly Hall on Tyralis and the 42 civilizations that turned away. I thought about Eleanor Webb in her laboratory, cracking the secret of zero-point energy and handing it to a government that chose to build weapons with it instead of wonders. I thought about Simon Drake spending 30 years in the void, training for a battle he hoped would never come. I thought about myself, standing in an empty room, telling 300 billion beings that their stars were hostages. I thought about all of it, every piece of the story, every choice that led to this moment, this kitchen, this question. And then I answered, "What do you think?" Seelith Vaughn stared at me. Her compound eyes caught the morning light coming through the crooked kitchen window, and they fractured it into dozens of tiny reflections, each one showing my face from a slightly different angle, like a mosaic of the same tired man repeated across the surface of her gaze. She did not answer for a long time, and in that silence, I watched her see it. The thing, the quality, the essence, the fundamental characteristic that every alien species had been trying to identify and categorize since the message. The thing that made humanity different from every other civilization in the galaxy. The thing that allowed us to build schools with one hand and doomsday devices with the other, to show mercy to the soldiers who killed our children, to threaten the annihilation of every living thing in the universe while wearing a gray shirt and speaking in a calm voice. It was not anger, not cruelty, not madness or fanaticism or cold-blooded calculation. It was grief. Simple, bottomless, ancient grief. The grief of a species that has been burying its children for 200,000 years, and has never stopped hoping that the next century will be different, and has never stopped preparing for the possibility that it will not be. We did not build the veil because we wanted power over the galaxy. We built it because we loved what we had, and we had learned, through millennia of painful experience, that love without the ability to protect it is just a more elaborate form of loss. We built it because there is no contradiction between reaching out your hand and keeping a weapon behind your back when you have been bitten enough times to know that not every hand you reach toward will be gentle. Seelith Vaughn stood. She bowed her head in the Vorathi gesture of deepest respect, a slow inclination that exposed the vulnerable joint at the base of her skull, the most trusting gesture her species could make. She held it for 5 full seconds. Then she straightened, turned, and walked out of my cottage without saying another word. I watched her shuttle lift off and climb into the morning sky, its tri-wings catching the sunlight, shrinking to a bright point among the clouds before disappearing entirely. Then I went back inside. I sat down at my desk. I picked up my pen, and I wrote the last words of the story you are reading now. They call it the long quiet. This era of peace that we stumbled into through a door we never wanted to open. No wars, no invasions, no empires rising on the bones of the weak. Just silence, stretching from one arm of the galaxy to the other, held in place by the weight of what we showed them we could do, and the mercy we showed them we would choose. I wish I could tell you it feels like victory. It does not. It feels like standing alone in a room full of people who will never look at you the same way again. It feels like building the most beautiful garden in the world, and knowing that underneath the soil, you buried something that could poison everything if the ground ever shifts. But Grace's name is on that wall, and the galaxy is quiet. And the children who are growing up right now, human, and Vorathi, and Krell, and Drathani, and every other species under every star, will live their lives in a universe where nobody dares to start a war. They will play in parks that were rebuilt from rubble. They will study in schools that were constructed on the ashes of the ones we lost. They will look up at the night sky and see the same stars that I see from my porch every evening, and they will not know, most of them, what is hidden in orbit around each one. That is the gift we gave them. Peace, purchased at a price that I will spend the rest of my life trying to justify, built on a foundation that I pray will never be tested, maintained by a silence that is equal parts love and fear. I have decided, for grace's sake, if not my own, that quiet is enough. It has to be enough. Because there will not be a second chance.